Hello and welcome to the Techie podcast on the role of AI in transforming businesses and jobs. Artificial intelligence or AI brought in the industrial revolution and is changing the business landscape significantly. It has created a disruption across sectors. Beyond productivity, the current capabilities and future potential of AI are essentially limitless. AI applications have led to enhanced automation of complex processes, personalized customer experience, improved risk management, and much more. We are witnessing the biggest evolution of the working era with the digital transformation. Now that we are gradually adopting the digital workspaces, AI is eliminating job profiles still remains a concern. Folks, in today's podcast, we're in conversation with an expert who will take us through the digital shift AI is making. Please join me in welcoming Prashanth Kaddi, who is a partner with Deloitte India in the consulting business working on analytics and cognition. He comes with 20 plus years of experience in technology, analytics, product management, and strategic marketing. He has set up and grown multiple businesses in the technology and data analytics space. Welcome to the show, Prashanth.
Thanks, Sukriti. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Host you, Prashanth. Let's move on and get going with the questions. Okay, so the first one here I have for you is that how is AI revolutionizing the future of work in India?
Right. So AI or artificial intelligence is revolutionizing both businesses and work in India. So in terms of businesses, I think there are a whole bunch of new transformations, business models, whether it is how we work with our customers, how we service them, how we run our operations, how we run our processes, etc. And from a work perspective, there are three broad changes that we see that are happening in the market among clients. The first is efficiency of work, and there's the whole concept of super jobs and super teams that we are seeing. How do technology and people interact with each other and create superior impact? The second one is in the efficacy of decision making, which is moving from decision making, which might be based on past data and experience, into an AI-driven recommendation to take specific decisions. And thirdly, and a little ironically, in unleashing creativity of the human workforce. And as at Deloitte, we call it the age of with, where machines work with humans, bringing the best of each other and unleashing the creativity that humans have to inspire basically the humans to do better in the workplace. So I would say these are the significant changes that we are seeing that artificial intelligence is driving in efficiency, efficacy, and creativity.
Right. Tell us about the trends of increased application of analytics and cognitive tools.
So analytics and cognitive tools are pretty much ubiquitous in enterprises these days. And in fact, the pandemic has given a major boost to it. Whether it is, for example, what we call the customer-facing functions, sales and marketing, customer service and experience, etc., or we look at in what we call the middle office, which is operations, supply chain, risk, so on in multiple industries, as well as internal processes, which are HR, IT, etc. In each of these, there is a significant drive which analytics and cognitive technologies are making. So just for example, especially given the pandemic, most of our interactions, earlier customers could walk into a workspace or into a retail space, into a showroom, and there could be multiple brand and stimuli they would be exposed to, various nudges they would experience, getting products from factory to points of sale and to customers. There were different models that were being followed. Internally, having people on board, embrace the culture of an organization, the technology processes that were there. There were a number of ways of working that were there. Each of these has been now disrupted by AI, and driven because of the necessity to be virtual across as well. So personalizing the interaction with the customers, nudging them to buy more and engage more, uh, efficiency or reliability of the supply chain to reach products to customers at a reasonable cost, uh, ensuring that our workforce is engaged, and also we are onboarding, looking at people who are likely to leave the organization, etc., and create good programs and interventions for employee engagement. So across all of these, AI is actually playing a very, very important role, and more broadly, the tools of analytics and cognitive technologies.
So that was a very holistic preview of the entire segment where we can see AI working. Prashant, this actually brings me to another question here. That how are companies reinventing technology through AI in the digital space?
Companies are, obviously, while COVID has been a very difficult time, I think in the lighter vein, it has been suggested that COVID has done more for the digital transformation agenda than probably most other drivers, because it has become from a good to have to a must have, whether it's for large companies, family driven companies, small companies, etc. Now, where analytics, and let me take maybe a couple of examples to sort of make the point even stronger. One of our clients had to shut down their entire set of showrooms and retail spaces available, and they were, present both across the country. And therefore, the digital agenda driven by AI was very critical. And it was a high value item, which means even storing inventory is a problem. Therefore, how do we reach customers? How do we assure customers? How do we make sure that their consumption patterns continue, as well as to minimize the level of inventory that already exists? How do we minimize it? And going forward, how do we plan the business better, right? So all of this was enabled through AI algorithms, and then through a digital storefront and commerce, which was as well as for internal processes. Another client of ours, for example, had a product business, which obviously costs a lot of money to buy products upfront, and it has a certain life of a product. So, for example, if I buy a pair of headphones, maybe it has 12 months that I can use. A mobile phone has 24 months, etc. So, this company's products, they wanted to start as a service business model and create a new business model. But obviously, they had two basic issues. One is, how do we price this? Because there's no history of it. It's a new business model in a new market. And secondly, how do we make sure that the life of the product is tracked and enhanced so that EBITDA is positive, and profitability is maintained? Now, for both of these, there are different types of AI and machine learning models that were created, a number of models, but to answer these two questions. And therefore, they are now in a new business model as well, which is an as a service business model. So, and obviously also a lot of companies, if they've onboarded every employee in a remote fashion in the last 12, 15 months, so the culture of the organization, how to look at the right fits in the organization, how to look at CVs and shortlist and hire the right people. If certain people want to leave, how do we engage better with them, etc. So even from, there's a third example, of course, where employee engagement is being driven through AI and machine learning as well. So across the board, just to give a few examples, but the digital transformation agenda is now what CEOs are discussing and CXOs, as opposed to earlier, and it is an essential for today, and it's not a good to have for tomorrow.
Rightly, I just love those phrases you've used, Prashant. Moving on to the, since you're talking about employees here, I would want to know that how do you think AI is reshaping the entire job market for employees?
So in terms of employees, I think broadly what AI is doing is, uh, reshaping jobs in three ways. So the first is that the jobs such as, for example, let's take finance, where there was a certain ways of working that were done. Now, after the advent of AI and allied technologies, there's a whole bunch of areas which necessitates finance professionals to not only be familiar with some of the parts of AI, but be able to utilize, some of the parts or the work products which are delivered through intelligent automation or through machines, or as we call them. Right? So that is one level of upskilling that employees within the organizations have had to do, and their work content has therefore changed. The second is, for example, business leaders. So earlier, and all of the points that we were talking about of analytics-driven transformations and business models is eventually driven through business decisions. And business leaders, therefore, have had to make sure that they are more savvy. And we actually run a program called Tech Savvy. To how do we make sure that people who sort of spent a lot of years in the industry, who may not have exposure to modern technologies at the same level as maybe some of our millennials do, how do we sort of ensure that they are able to leverage and use this, the power of AI, and therefore drive the decisions that need to be made from them, right? And also, obviously, there's a whole lot of mundane, routine jobs, whether it is in support functions, whether it's in operations functions, which are more easily now automated, because it's not a rule-based automation, but an intelligent automation, which is AI-driven, which is possible. Therefore, necessitating that the people who actually look at some of these functions and areas of work are more savvy, are able to add that value more from a business and outcome perspective of what their KPIs or their outcomes or outputs are expected, and be able to manage the underlying AI pieces which lie within. Obviously, there's also been a whole bunch of things for technology professionals who more directly deal with AI. And for them, it's been a time of learning and being able to deploy and actually manage some of these models into practice.
All right. What would you advise to the existing talent aspiring to learn AI tools and technologies?
Right. So I think with the demand in the market, and the supply and gap between supply and demand globally and also in India, there's a significant demand for talent, which is AI and ML educated, so to say. So there's obviously a whole bunch of courses which are available, and a lot of professionals across different paths are looking at how do they get into this. So while there is a good coverage or a decent coverage of picking up technologies and techniques which are taught, so for example, languages such as Python and R, and certain techniques, etc., programming, etc., which are taught in some of these, I believe that for professionals to make an impact and differentiate themselves over longer term, there are a couple of other skills as well that is very important that they need to familiarize with. One of them is to understand the basics and the fundamentals of how AI came to be, and especially some of the statistical techniques, because at what time and at what place do we use what technique, how much of data is required for a specific technique, therefore is it reliable to use a specific technique. Some of the AI techniques tend to be black boxes, that is, they lack explainability, whereas many applications you do need to have some understanding of what input variable has impacted what output. So therefore, understanding the fundamentals of statistics, and therefore being able to make the right choices if given a problem statement, right? That's very important, number one. Number two, I believe, is also an understanding of the real world. So all the problems we solve, whether it is for individuals or businesses, have a real world context, and therefore also have a limitation in terms of the availability of data. The real world is never as perfect as we would like it to be in order to sort of build an AI model. So making those choices, how do we ensure that we retain sanity of the in terms of data and accuracy in the real world, while looking at the limitations that are imposed? How does the output of what we have produced actually help someone or a process make a decision and affect an outcome, right? So I think these are two things which are very important in addition to the third thing, which is the programming and techniques, which also are very critical. Not to say that that's less critical, but these would make a more complete professional in the AI and ML space.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing so much information on how AI is transforming and molding the business and job roles, Prashanth. It was an absolute pleasure to have you and speak about AI.
Likewise, thanks, Sukriti, and pleasure's all mine.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. Please stay safe and take care of yourself. We will be back with another insightful podcast very soon. Till then, stay tuned for more.